Hey, deserving listeners, this is Chapter 5 in our deep dive on the Duggars. Let's get into it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castaneda, and I authorize dealers to be authorized.
So, 2005. We have reached 2005. The family has had their first special that has aired on TLC. And also, to catch you up, the family does know about Josh abusing the younger sisters and the babysitter of the younger sisters, 5 young girls. And they went to the police, they went to other people in the church, and they seem to be moving on with their lives, assuming that Josh won't ever do it again, and never going to a therapist, and seemingly never going to CPS. So, 2005, Josh continues to defy. This is the oldest child, Josh. He's the one who abused the younger children. Josh continued to confide in Bobby Holt. Bobby is a woman. She's in the documentary Shiny Happy People. And this is according to her, and trigger warning, by the way, because it gets a little graphic here, but I think it's important to point out that this is what she was told, that during one visit, Josh admitted to penetrating the vagina of a 5-year-old girl with his finger. So up until this point, maybe it seems that what was told to the parents was that Josh had touched the girls while they were sleeping over their clothes or stuff like this. But penetrating the vagina of a 5-year-old girl with his finger, I mean, yikes. If it was ambiguous before, it's not anymore. And also, Josh told Bobby Holt that he had abused one of his sisters for 3 years. The sister was from the age of 2 to 5. Hard to know the frequency there, but even if it's a pretty low frequency, like once a year, that's still pretty alarming, right? And I point this out because the parents probably knew at least some of these details, if not all of them. At the very least, they should have been informed about it. But as a therapist, I've heard a lot of different sorts of things in this category where you have a sibling who has touched a younger sibling. And I've heard a lot of different accounts, things that are really quite mild. It's hard to know how the victim will feel, even if you do have a mild interaction, so to speak, a mild interaction. You could still be quite traumatized by that as a younger person, but the trauma often does coincide or does correlate with the severity and the frequency and other kinds of elements like coercion and threats and this kind of thing. But anyway, so I would hear very mild things like the initial reporting of Josh having touched one of his younger siblings over the clothes while they were sleeping. Still abusive and can be massively traumatic, but you might hear something, and it was just one instance, and it seems pretty clear that it was just one instance. All the way to, extreme abuse behavior. What we're hearing from Josh, from his own mouth, is more towards the extreme, right? Ongoing...
I'm wondering, doesn't that seem like a cry for help that he would be confessing this to Bobby? Because you would think if he was very self-aware that this is wrong and that he needs to keep it quiet because he wants to keep going, he just wouldn't talk to anyone. It almost seems like someone needs to stop me, or I don't know. It's incredible to me that he would be sharing that with Bobby.
Yeah. I'll commend him for doing this. It's hard to know what his motivations were. It's possible that Bobby Holt was just really good at extracting the information. Yeah, it's hard to know. Certainly, you can have people, and I've worked with some people like this, unfortunately, who will like to brag about it. So was that what he was doing? Was he getting off on being able to describe it? That's also possible. But it's also very possible that it was a cry for help, that he was concerned. He was young and very worried and ashamed. And because that is the normal course for this sort of thing, that people who notice these kinds of attractions, and particularly if they act on them, they're usually quite alarmed with their behavior. They look at themselves and think, oh my God, I'm one of those people. What's wrong with me? I don't want to be like this. I want to be normal. I want to be like everyone else. How come I have this urge and this desire and this attraction? I don't want this urge and attraction. That's often, it's not always the case, but that is often. So it's possible that he was saying, look, you got to know what's been happening. In fact, another criticism of the documentary Shiny Happy People is they didn't even go into these details. They just surface level talked about maybe one conversation between Josh and Bobby Holt. I later learned that Josh was regularly talking one-on-one with Bobby Holt about what he had done, and over the span of a number of years. So it's hard to know what was going on, but I just keep thinking, if only one of the adults in this entire situation, because there were many adults, not only a police officer, but the parents, Bobby and Jim Holt, other people, I think, if only they had reached out to a treatment specialist, because even if he wasn't reaching out for help, then that treatment specialist would have been able to help. There are treatments for people like this. There are ways of managing it, obviously, but there also are ways of reorienting one's sexuality. It can be hard work, but it can work often. Sometimes it's a matter of elevating or creating the opportunity for non-abusive types of attractions while giving it enough time so that the person can get their attachment needs and sexual needs met in ways that are with peers, right? And then over time, their attraction starts to diminish towards children. They might always kind of have that in the back of their mind, but they have a venue to actually get their needs met. The problem is that unless you do something along those lines, the individual keeps acting on their urge and it will lock in that behavior. So the earlier you can intervene with these people, the better. Obviously, when they're going through puberty is a great time to intervene, and the treatment specialists will attest to absolutely being able to help people with this. So it's just this tragedy that, and really to Josh, because eventually, long story short, spoiler alert, he ends up in prison.
It's hard enough for any family, because I think you were mentioning this before too, how it doesn't get reported, like they're afraid and stuff. And then you compound it with a lot of these cults, they don't like to deal with outside forces. They like to deal with everything internally. So I think that's what his parents were trying to do. First of all, they were trying to hook him up with an adult woman to like distract him. I don't know if she was an adult yet, but anyway, someone more of his age, right? In fact, they literally told that to his friend, the friend of the family. It's like, no, because the friend of the family is like, wait, are you trying to use my daughter to like just like pull him away? He's like, yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it was Bobby Holt's daughter. That's
Bobby Holt's
what it was.
daughter, yeah. And then, like, we said he went to the elders of the church, and it's like, yeah, we got to try to just like deal with it ourselves. So no idea of like, well, maybe I should reach out to a specialist, an expert, someone that can really help with this.
Right. You imagine that there's a paranoia about not only just outsiders to the cult, but also liberal therapists that will infect the minds of Josh, and we can't have that. So who knows, but quite possible. All right. So 2006, they have their second special. This is 2 years later. So a pretty slow ramp up, The first special in 2004 was very popular, but you could be in the family and imagine that they're just like, well, okay, that was a one-shot.
That was that, right?
Yeah, that's over. But then they have their second special, Raising 16 Children is what it's called.
It's been 2 years.
Right. And so, because the first special was 14 and pregnant.
Right.
And not 14 years old, but 14 children and pregnant. But now, 2 years later, it's Raising 16 Children. And they were becoming famous at this point.
It occurs to me that I'm sure they did that on purpose as a double entendre at the time when they put the first one out, because in either case, the title would catch people's eyes. Like 14 and pregnant, people might think, oh, someone's 14 and they're pregnant. Or in this case, no, actually, there's 14 kids.
To be clear, it's called 14 Children and Pregnant.
Never mind.
And in the same year, they have a third special, 16 Children and Moving In. So this is the episode where TLC actually paid to have their 7,000 square foot house completed.
Oh, right. Yes. because they had been working on it like themselves with the children doing all the hammering and stuff. But it was, I mean, building a house is hard enough. Building a 7,000 square foot home.
Yeah, and if you've seen this house, it looks like a giant compound/barn.
Yeah.
And it was coincidentally designed without thinking about them being on a reality TV show. But it's perfect for reality TV because it's big and it's got a big yard and lots of room for cameras and rooms for multiple children, this kind of thing. So anyway, TLC actually invested and finished the house for them. And so at this point, TLC is really locking in on this family, probably seeing the dollar signs, right? And also TLC is starting to transition more into reality TV in general. So you just got to wonder about the executive meetings at this point. Okay, so big event happens in 2006. The police investigate Josh. This is a major thing that happens. Again, this is before they become big and household names in certain circles. This is still early. That's the emphasis, is like the controversy that would eventually plague the Duggars was, kind of completed before they even had their own series. They've only had 3 specials at this point. And the fact that TLC and others just forged ahead, including the family, because you got to think, if you're the family, it's like, maybe we should just avoid the limelight for a while because eventually it's going to come out. But anyway.
I mean, TLC must have heard by that point, right? They had to have information.
It'd be dumb if they didn't have at least someone who was looking into this sort of thing. But I don't know. I could also see a situation where TLC, because these reality TV producers, they are on a string budget. They don't. That's why they have reality TV. It's because they don't want to spend money on a regular TV show. So it's possible that they just literally don't have the person power paid for to even bother looking into these things. But anyway, so Berto, do you remember a few chapters ago when I told you to remember the letter?
Yes, I was so curious. I didn't look it up because I wanted to have the big reveal.
Right. So why this was not in the documentary, I don't know. I mean, this is a big deal. Yeah, this letter is what starts the whole thing rolling.
Really?
The whole thing comes down to this letter. Okay, so to remind people, Josh tells his parents that he has been abusing the younger daughters in the family, and the parents don't know what to do, and they bring Josh to these family friends within the cult, Jim and Bobby Holt, which we've already been talking about, and they were supposed to be like spiritual leaders that are supposed to help. Josh was actually sent to a facility within the cult, or recommended to do that or something, and the church actually reviewed the situation. So the church dealt with it. Jim and Bobby Holt, I think a part of the cult, were also, and they were the parents of Kaylee, who was the young girl that you were mentioning earlier, where they were trying to get Josh to start to court a peer and move towards marriage because they thought maybe that would fix Josh. In and of itself, that's not ill-conceived. Earlier I was saying part of the treatment might actually be to help them have their needs met through a relation, through peer relationships. But in the absence of all the other elements of the treatment, then it's not likely to get rid of the problem, and it didn't. But
and by the way, also, imagine you're a daughter, and they're like, yeah, you should court this guy. He's awesome. He's great. He comes from this great family. Asterisk? Nope, not even an asterisk. Like, we don't know anything more about it.
Yeah.
And it's like,
right.
Shouldn't she at least be informed? I mean,
because she was blindsided. So what, and that feeling that you're identifying is what motivates the letter, I think. Anyway, so her name's Kaylee and is courting Josh at this point. Then the parents, Jim, Bob, and Michelle, go with, maybe they bring Josh, I'm not sure, to Jim and Bobby Holt, and they inform Jim and Bobby Holt. To their credit, Jim, Bob, and it's really kind of hard to keep these names straight because you have Jim, Bob, and Michelle Duggar, and then you have Jim and Bobby Holt. Right. Anyway, so they go to Kaylee's parents to say, hey, by the way, Josh has this problem. So good on them. They could have swept it under the rug and continued with the courting process with Kaylee, but they tell Jim and Bobby Holt. Kaylee either is in the room hearing this or overhears it, and is alarmed, as you're saying, like, wait, what? This guy that I was being groomed to marry has this problem? Yikes. And so she doesn't know what to do because she is in a cult, and I think she's in the cult, and she's isolated, so she doesn't know who to talk to, right? Which would be normal even if you weren't in a cult. I think that would be a pretty scary situation. And so she writes this letter. Kaylee writes this letter, and she's going to send it to an author that she reads books of, probably within the cult, I'm thinking, or at least a fundamentalist Christian author. And at the last minute, she decides against sending the letter, and she folds up the letter, puts it in this random book, and it goes in the family library. Well, that was a couple years earlier to this, in 2000. So now we're at 2006, and the family lent the book to someone within the church on accident.
No way, dude.
Yeah.
They just lent the book.
Well, I don't think the parents knew the letter was in there.
No, of course not. They just lent the book. But what a crazy, like, I'm sure they weren't lending all their books out left and right. That's so crazy.
Yeah. Why this wasn't in the documentary, I don't know.
I mean, it's such an interesting story. I mean, the whole scenario is horrific, but as part of it, this bit is like the kind of thing you'd want to see in a movie.
This is what you would put in a fictional depiction or something like this. It has so much drama. So apparently that person finds the letter, reads it, and I think that person either told someone or went straight to the church and told people in the church, and then the information starts spreading through their church, which is in the IBLP cult, by the way. But still, not everyone in this cult is completely brainwashed into the situation. Some people were, well, regardless of what group of people you're going to inform them about something like this, you're going to see a similar breakdown in my anecdotal experience, in that some people blamed Kaylee for being a gossip. Like, oh, how dare she?
Oh my gosh, dude, that's horrible.
How dare she talk about this? This is a private matter. It's all Kaylee's fault. Some people defended the Duggars and Josh, hey, kids do things sometimes or whatever. But some people were very alarmed by Josh's abuse of the younger kids, even though they're in this cult. They're just like, well, wait, what's going on? There were some people that were more relatable, shall we say. And I think someone at the church actually decided to take action. And again, who was that person? Because the rest of this would never have happened if it wasn't for that person. Now, it could have been the person who read the letter to begin with, or it could have been someone that, who knows, but someone in the church called two different people. Number one, they called the Arkansas Child Abuse Hotline.
Finally. Oh my God. Years in the making, that call.
Yes. And provided an anonymous report, but identified Josh Duggar, right? And also, so because the Duggars were on their rise in fame, and they were really starting to hit their stride with this, they don't have their series yet, but they're really starting to be famous and tabloidy, that Oprah actually invited the Duggars to come on the show.
This is the part I did know, that they were going to be on Oprah, and someone tipped Oprah off.
Right.
Or her team, yeah.
So this church member knew about this apparently, and actually called Oprah, called the production team, the show, and informed about what was in this letter. And the show received this anonymous email or letter or something outlining the abuse that Josh had committed. And the email warned the Oprah show to not have the Duggars on their show. And apparently the Oprah team, obliged and canceled the family's scheduled appearance.
Now, by the way, I found it, one thing I found odd was like, how did they, I'm glad they did, but how did they know that they were going to be on Oprah? I wondered if like they had announced it at the church or something, like, hey, the Duggars are coming to Oprah or something.
Right, good point. Probably, because it's not like Oprah at the beginning of the month says, here's our schedule,
yeah,
right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, because they hadn't even appeared yet. It's not like, because usually you would record it, and I bet you it was the Duggars themselves that shot themselves in the foot on that one.
Yeah.
And then the Oprah team forwarded the email So not only did they cancel the appearance, but they also just forwarded the email to the Department of Human Services hotline, which is probably a similar system as the child abuse hotline would be in. And presumably the hotline then called the police. But someone eventually calls the police, but it was probably one of these hotlines. So this is what should have happened from the beginning, right?
Right.
That a proper investigation to protect the children, a proper investigation to help set up Josh with proper treatment. But so now, 2006, before they have a series, by the way, they get this opportunity.
Do we remember how old Josh was when it first started coming out to his family and things like that this was happening? Because, I mean, think of all those years lost and all the abuse that happened in the subsequent years. And
Josh was 14.
14! My gosh, like you could have intervened into a 14-year-old's life, which is so much more malleable at that point than an adult.
So now in 2006, he's 18. He's 18 at this point. And So,
and not to mention all the abuse that could have been, potentially stopped.
I mean, that's the main thing is that's always number one. And I went over this in a previous chapter that when I'm involved in cases like this, the number one immediate priority is to protect victims.
Yeah.
So if that means taking Josh out of the house, and that's what it means, if it means literally putting him in a side of the house, because I've done this sort of work where you actually will, like if I was with one family one time where this had happened, the older sibling had sexually abused the younger sibling, and we tried to figure out a solution to protect the younger child. Best case scenario, the old child would go stay with a relative that doesn't live with any, minors, but that wasn't possible. So we had the children had to stay on a floor of the house. So the older kid could only be on one of the floors and the younger kid could only be on one of the other floors. And there was a door there and the parents were always monitoring it. They were always home, that kind of thing. So that's number one. And that obviously was not done, or at least seemingly not done. I think there were reports that maybe the parents did some things, but I doubt that it was robust enough to really protect the younger kids. Anyway, so the hotline calls the police. The police investigate the family. The police interviewed the 5 victims, the 4 sisters, and the babysitter. But since there's a 3-year statute of limitations, Berto, no fucking charges.
3 years?
Yes.
What?
Yes. It's fucking ridiculous. I mean, I get why a statute of limitations exists.
But is this for minors? Is that why? It's like...
What do you mean?
I mean, is it 3 years if you're a minor? Like, it can't be 3 years in general, right?
It might be, but every state has a different statute around these.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I don't know how they coincide, but it's a well understood problem that, with regular sorts of crimes, like if someone murders someone or if someone, steals your car, then it's very likely that you're going to report it pretty quickly. And the statute of limitations, it's not super intuitive to me as to why it's a good thing, but I've heard experts explain it to me as to why it's a good thing. Like the person who committed the crime, they've moved on with their life, they've changed their ways, and then all of a sudden, like 15 years later, boom, they go to prison. It doesn't make a lot of sense in that way.
Well, for some things though, like murder, there isn't a limit because sorry that you did eventually stop murdering, but you did take a life. And I think that, so maybe we don't have to have no statute of limitations, but 3 years?
But particularly with sexual abuse, because it's well understood and documented that when people are abused, they don't report it. Like I said, when someone's murdered or when someone steals your car, there's not a barrier to reporting it. If it's worth reporting, you're going to report it. But, in general. But with sexual abuse, everyone understands, particularly if you're a child at the time, the chance of a 3-year-old reporting to anyone that they were sexually abused is, pretty much zero. And so this notion that somehow the same statute of limitations or time spans apply to these kinds of crimes is really stupid, particularly when the law is set up, presumably in part, to protect the public. And a major component of protecting the public from a criminal is to identify them and indict them and put sanctions on them, maybe prison time or maybe mandated treatment. So no one wins when, including the perpetrator who might need to be forced in treatment. When we have these, now it's changing. There are, similar to domestic violence, there's a intimate partner violence, there are problems with this, right? Because victims are terrified.
Sorry, and by the way, like the all or nothing part is also kind of silly. Like, okay, what if you do have a statute of limitations for having someone go to jail, but like, can't they still be mandated treatment or something? You know, like a range of options over time. And the other thing is, were all of the crimes older than 3 years, or we just don't know because like that's all they knew about?
Right. So that's a huge ambiguity here is, did Josh continue to abuse? There's no evidence of that. There's no reports of that. And I could see a world in which he did manage to suppress it, or it morphed into the child porn area, which he gets into later. Hard to know. Is it possible that he continued to abuse his younger siblings? Yeah. There were very little measures taken that would assure that that wouldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
But we don't know. We definitely know it happened for a span of time prior to 14, or around the time he was 14. And once he made the reports, I haven't heard any reports of anything happening beyond that. Yeah. So apparently, even though the police were contacted, nothing happened. I don't know if CPS was called and CPS just dropped the ball, or CPS did investigate. I didn't hear anything about that. I could imagine a situation in which the police didn't bother calling Child Protective Services. I don't know, but there's no report of CPS, Child Protective Services, getting involved. The police can do some things, but really who you want involved are ongoing caseworkers that are trained in this area. And I didn't hear any reports of that happening.
And that's what I was saying. Like, okay, so let's say that they have the stupid 3-year statute of limitations. Okay, fine. So then don't press charges, but call CPS. Like, do something that maybe can still help the family and the victims and the perpetrator, even if, fine, you're not going to press the criminal charges.
Right. And I'm glad you're bringing that up, because that is different. CPS is a different process, and there are different laws that dictate CPS's actions, and there is no statute of limitations to CPS and the laws that allow for them to take action. So you could tell CPS that your father, for example, abused you 35 years ago, and if your father, who's now, say, 70 years old, is still in contact with children, then CPS in all likelihood will take action to protect the children, even though the report was made 35 years later. So, I don't know, but I didn't hear any evidence that had happened. So the details of the police report, the investigation that happened in 2006, were apparently leaked to the internet. Maybe someone on the Oprah show, but who knows? Someone leaked it. And message boards started to speculate about this police report or the details of it. And these message forums would grow as the Duggars gained more fame. But it was a very small group of people who were mostly being ignored as the Duggars, because that's what's so weird about, that's why I think it's important to go over the timeline, is that everything was available from the beginning.
Yeah.
Before the Duggars became, even to TLC, you could argue, right?
Right. That's what's incredible.
Right. It's one thing if you're, I don't know, Michael Jackson or something, and you become super famous, and then the reports start coming out, or Bill Cosby, and then the report. But the reports were out there and available on the internet before they started to have their major fame with their own series.
That's one of the things that blew my mind the most about the story, was that what little I knew, I had assumed it was like, all more recent or after the fact or whatever. And it was just like, wait, what? This already happened? Like, they knew this? What?
Yeah. And that's another part of this story that I think the documentary doesn't emphasize enough of, is at this point in 2006, you have hundreds of people that are aware of what Josh did. You have the parents and maybe some of the siblings. You have Jim and Bobby Holt. You have Kaylee. You have several church members, if not all of them. Who knows how far this rumor went. You have people on the Oprah team, maybe Oprah herself. I mean, literally, it's possible that Oprah Winfrey knew that Josh had abused the younger siblings. You have this other hotline that knows about it. You have this cop that will later go to prison for child porn himself. You have church members that are, I think, upper admin sort of church members that Jim and Michelle went to initially. You have the police, a precinct that investigated this.
Yeah.
There's probably a number of detectives. Think about all the people that know about someone who is at risk, clearly, of sexually abusing. I think Josh at this point probably has like 10 younger siblings that are girls. I mean, and who knows? It's these kind of people will abuse boys too. All the children that Josh is around, and in an insular situation where all the kids are being homeschooled, for Christ's sake. I mean, the kids are imprisoned with this known predator that's been predating on the siblings for years prior to the age of 14, and nothing happened, Berto.
I mean, you can't ask for a worse situation to, if you have a wolf and sheep, it's like the wolf's living with the sheep. The wolf's already eaten several of the sheep, and there they are, and no one's doing anything about it.
Yeah. Just a complete breakdown of everything that is not supposed to break down. I mean, at least one of these systems, the police at this point, the CPS getting involved. I don't even know if they were.
This is all before the show.
Yes.
That's mind-blowing.
And I bring all this up because there are a lot of people who have been through this as victims or family members or something. And there's this myth out there that if you call the authorities, then everything will be, you just have to get the authorities involved and then everything will be fine. And I know some of you listening will know that that's ridiculous. But I was disabused of this assumption early in my career when I might have even still been an intern, but I think I might have been just hired. So I would have been 26, 27, early career. And I had this teenage girl who told me that she was being sexually abused by her father. And she was hinting that she wanted to tell me something. And so I had to really work hard at making her feel comfortable and telling her, no, I'm here for you. And, I'm saying all these things like, I can help you with this, but I can't help you unless you tell me. So what's going on? And then, several sessions in, she finally tells me that she's being sexually abused by her father. And, and I'm just, it's hard to hear, but I'm there for her. And I'm just like, you did the right thing, good job. I commend you advocating for yourself. And the system is here. At this point, I'm naive. So, the system is here to help you. That's why it exists. And so we call CPS, and CPS gets involved. And I'm like, da-da-da. And they go into the home. They interview her. They interview the dad. And long story short, they do nothing.
Man.
Nothing happens, except for now the dad knows that the daughter is now telling people. And God knows what, it was a long time ago. I don't remember how it sort of resolved, but.
Was she even allowed to keep going to therapy?
I don't know. It was long, it was almost 30 years ago, but I don't remember it resolving well. I don't remember it resolving horrifically, but I imagine I didn't have much time left with her after that. I don't know. But that was when I learned, oh, wait, so it's not the way that people talk about it. And it's not even the way that CPS talks about it, because you talk to CPS and they'll say this, that. I will say overall, CPS workers and the system does often work. I think what happened in this case was the allegation of sexual abuse, and it was clearly sexual abuse, was not at the level that is severe enough for CPS to really fly into action. And I think they said, well, let's work with the dad. But the overall message to the daughter was, well, I'm still left on the lurch living with this guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's pretty awful. And But even if we say, well, most of the time CPS works, you have all these other systems that are involved, at least in this Josh situation. You have the police, you have church, you have parents, you have community, and the internet, and yet the victims are still being victimized because we have a society that doesn't recognize how important this is, or at least they kind of do, but they don't want to do the hard work to actually fund these kinds of, programs. I mean, we could go down this road of just the sort of people like the Duggars that vote for politicians like the Duggars. They want to dismantle all sorts of systems, including the kinds of funded systems that would be able to help situations like this, because clearly the church and the community and sometimes even the police don't do fucking shit. So if you give CPS enough money and give them enough power, and you don't hinder them through stripping away regulations and power for these institutions, then you're much more likely to see protected children instead of believing in QAnon and Tom Hanks is drinking the blood. I mean, literally, that's what people believe.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest ironies, is the obsession in the last few years about child abuse, which, great, let's have that conversation. Let's go after the actual problems. Let's put up some money. How about we put up some tax funds? Oh, we don't want to tax people. Oh, I see. But here's the other thing too. I honestly feel like as a system, that cult, but in general, like the cult they were a part of, it's more important to keep the system going than individuals suffering. So if you have to have some sacrifices, and I don't even mean this like they were like, ha ha ha, well, they shall suffer, but no, I think it's kind of like how corporations with stockholders in Wall Street, they'll do some pretty evil stuff. And a lot of times the people involved either are not meaning for it to be evil or what, they're just like, hey, we need to make more money for the stockholders. So fine, I guess take the factory to that place that's more unethical. Here, it's like, I feel like it's similar where, like, look, the big thing is we need to keep our system going, make sure we spread it, make sure we have more power. These problems, yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's not as big a deal. Right. Stuff happens.
Right. You can reduce it to the following flowchart. Does taking action and actually trying to protect the younger children and really seeking help from treatment specialists, does addressing the problem in reality, does it actually further the power of this cult and the people in power or not? And the answer is no. To actually take action and to actually address it, you threaten the cult, you threaten the administration, because, especially in this situation, because they were aware of it years prior to this.
Yeah.
And it doesn't serve them. I mean, at the very least, even if they don't think a bad thing will happen to them, there's nothing good to the organization in terms of power and money that could come from even spending the resources to really try to address this, right?
But it goes against the core messaging. Like, you follow these rules, everything's fine. Like, you follow the chain of command, you follow what was the name they get, like, you're fine. The umbrellas, right? Like
the umbrellas, yeah.
You're okay. So this goes against all of that.
Right.
Like, what do you mean? This can still happen? In fact, it can happen and get covered up? Like, what?
Right. Yeah. And I guess as maybe an ancillary thing is it's potentially an indictment on having so many kids because there's less supervision and there's explicit messages to the older kids that they have to take care of the younger kids. So it could undermine that whole system, right? So the older kids aren't responsible enough to take care of the younger, anyway. Yeah. So around this time, so just to wrap this up, nothing happens. Oprah Winfrey's team finds out about it, that letter, but the one thing that happens is the internet now knows, which that grows over time. This same year, 2006, Jim Bob sought the Republican nomination for the Arkansas State Senate, and he lost again. He has lost a number of political runs, for federal Senate, this sort of thing. But with that, Berto, let's go to 2007. But the rest of this episode is just going to be for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to hear the rest of this discussion, become a patron, go to patreon.com. Otherwise, everyone, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.